Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on today's topical training webinar. We still got a few minutes before we start. A few people still joining us and logging in, so we'll wait for them to get set up before we jump in. Hello again. Thanks for joining us. We still got a few people joining us for today's topical webinar. Like I said earlier, we're just going to wait a few more moments here for everybody to get joined and situated, and then we'll jump right in. Just got one more minute here. Again, thanks for joining us on today's topical webinar. Just waiting for everybody to get logged in. Just another minute or so, and we'll get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me on today's topical webinar. Now, we normally have a basic and advanced webinar for all of our labeling products once a month, and here at TechLinks, we recognize there is a lot to learn about in the labeling world. And because of this, we've launched a series of training webinars focused on specific topics that we expect most of our current users to face. And today's webinar is going to focus on security and traceability in CODESOFT and LabelView. Now, just so you're aware, this is going to be the first part in a two-part mini-series. Next week's part 2 will focus on CODESOFT and Label Archive, and that's going to be hosted by Scott Fabian. So for today's webinar, I'll be using CODESOFT. However, I just want all of you to keep in mind that LabelView and CODESOFT are very similar, and a lot of what we are going to see in this webinar is going to be available in LabelView. And for our Label Matrix users, we just want you to see how easy using some of these advanced security and traceability functions can be. And also, if you like what you're seeing, it's very easy to upgrade to either LabelView or CODESOFT from Label Matrix, as there are built-in converters available. Just a bit about myself. My name is Rob Learman. I'm an enterprise support technician here at TechLinks. Been here for a bit over 10 years now. Recently moved to Arizona from Wisconsin. I can tell you I do not miss the weather. I love it down here. And lastly, that's our little TechLinks mascot, Maya. Just a few housekeeping items I want to get out of the way before we get started here. You've probably already noticed all the headsets, telephones, microphones. Those are all muted on your end. That is done proactively. It's just when we get quite a few individuals in these webinars, the lines can get a bit cluttered. So as I said, we do mute those. Any questions at all throughout the webinar, feel free to ask. We do have a live moderator, Tony. You will just need to expand the questions section in the GoToWebinar console. Type in your question, click send, we'll see it pop up on our end, and he'll be able to address those live. We'll also have a Q&A session at the very end of the webinar. Now that we have the housekeeping items in place, let's move into our agenda for today's webinar. We'll take a look at connecting label password protection to ensure labels are not unintentionally edited or printed. So we're going to take a look at document level passwords. Probably the easiest thing we can do in the software. A step up from there is going to be User Manager. It's sort of going to mirror Active Directory, where you'll be setting up user groups, assigning permissions to those groups, and then placing user accounts in those groups so that there's no actual login and sign on with the software with label template. And we'll take a look at maintaining a log file, taking a look at some of the auditing properties of CODESOFT. And lastly, we'll take a look at designing an ideal printing process with Form Editor and ClickPrint, as well as Form Designer. So sort of removing the design interface from print users so that they cannot see or modify the label template. After we talk about those topics, we'll jump into the live demonstration, show you all of this, and then we will slide into that Q&A section that I was talking about earlier. So before we jump in, let's just talk about the software we're using. What is CODESOFT? So CODESOFT is our advanced barcode labeling software. It's very easy to integrate into your existing business systems, including ERP systems. Some of the more advanced features, such as grid fields, enable adding multiple database records onto one template to facilitate document printing. In my experience, it has unmatched printer driver supports. You can easily install most thermal transfer and direct thermal printers as they are embedded directly in the software. So when you install the software, you're actually getting all of those drivers. You don't need to jump out to a website and hunt down the manufacturer model and download it from a website. You can also combine CODESOFT with our other TechLinks solutions, such as Sentinel, if you want to automate the print process. Label Archive, which you'll be viewing next week for part 2. It adds more layers of security and auditing to the software, such as three-step approval processes, heavy audit trails. Also, if you need to meet CFR 21 compliance or GDPR standards, that's definitely the way to go. So we'll show that next week. And lastly, our TechLinks Central, which will allow you to print from a web browser. We're going to launch a quick poll before we jump into the topics. You should be viewing that on your end shortly. Just curious how often some of you encounter labeling issues, either daily, weekly, or monthly. Looks like most answers are going to be monthly or weekly. We'll leave this open for another couple moments here, just make sure everybody answers. I'm sure we do have some resellers and distributors on this webinar, so you just want to think about how many issues your end users run into as well. It's good that it's not daily. Daily is definitely not in the lead. That's so far the least checked one. We're at about 10% for daily. All right, we'll go ahead and share this. So it looks like most of it was monthly. And then, as I said, daily was about 10%. So we're going to try to alleviate some of those with some of these steps that we're going to be referring to or talking about later on in this webinar. So the first thing we can do is enable label password protection. It's by far the easiest thing we can do in this software. It's going to be a document level password. So it's not just on opening up the software, though we do have that, and we'll be talking about that next. This is per document. You can set up a full control and a print-only password, so essentially an admin and then the print users. It's really going to protect your labels from unauthorized users. Even if they're authorized, the actual print user, right out of the box, you install CODESOFT, you design a label, and then you give it to your end users. There's a lot of room for error that way. All they have to do is go to File, Open. They have a design template in front of them, and they would click Print. Now, what they should be doing is obviously printing, but they're in the design view and it's not locked down. So you can modify some of the variables, some of the objects on the label, even just moving them over a little bit, maybe modifying some of the formulas. If you have counters that absolutely can't repeat, things of that nature, anything in the label design that cannot be touched, you kind of want to remove that from the end user's capabilities or the print user's capabilities. We can do that by setting up this very simple label password, and we'll show you how to do that once we get to the live demonstration. Now, a step up from here is going to be user manager. So you're actually defining access rights and user roles. Like I said earlier, it is mirroring Active Directory, where we will create groups and you're assigning permissions to the groups. And then any users on the local machine, any user accounts on the local machine or your Active Directory domain controller, you can just add those to the group. So there's no sign-in necessary for the software, no sign-in necessary for the label template. The print user would just log into the PC, and based on their PC account, their Active Directory account, that's how we're assigning permissions. And as you can see on the right with the image there, it does get pretty granular. We'll discuss some of those options, as I said, once we get to that live demo. One thing I do want to note, User Manager does get installed by default with CODESOFT. However, if you're not seeing it in the Start menu, it is an option to disable as you're installing CODESOFT. So as you're running through the install wizard with CODESOFT, and you can add and remove the features that get installed that it possibly could have been removed. So if you're not seeing it on your PC, you just need to rerun the install and choose to modify that install and check off User Manager. That will then get installed. Another very helpful feature for the traceability is going to be log files. It's how you can audit what has been printed. So it's a very simple text file or a CSV file. The choice is yours. You can show a complete history of the labels printed, time of print. There's a number of options, and we'll take a look at those in that live demonstration. So maybe, again, you have that counter that absolutely cannot be repeated halfway through the day. You're seeing some different numbers than should be printed out. You can jump into those log files, see what went wrong. We also have form editor and form designer. Now, this is how we're, again, sort of removing the design interface from the end user, from the printer. I'm sorry, from the print user. So form designer is, it's going to need form editor is going to need click print to remove the design interface. So you're seeing that on the right. If you can picture a label with some simple when printed fields, all that variable information in the when printed field can be limited. So maybe it's a zip code, we can say only enter numeric values. As you can see of that example, if it's the energy class and they should only type in A through G, maybe make a drop down. They can't accidentally type in X. So once you have the design, the form editor set up, they would be launching it through ClickPrint, and we'll be showing you that during the live demonstration, as well as Form Designer. Now, Form Designer is a big step up from Form Editor. You're essentially designing the entire print interface from scratch. I kind of liken it to Visual Basic without the actual scripting. We're just going to show you how this is going to fit in and how it's going to enhance the security and traceability. We're not going to be designing forms from scratch. We have actually a separate webinar, a topical webinar dedicated to Form Editor and Form Designer on how to design those. So if you are curious on how to do that, you can chat our live moderator, Tony. He should be able to get you those links. So we're about ready to jump into that live training demo that I've been talking about. We're going to take a look at setting up the document level passwords. We'll take a look at setting up groups and adding users to those groups in User Manager. We'll take a look at setting up log files in CODESOFT. And then lastly, we'll take a look at Form Editor and ClickPrint, as well as Form Designer. Give me just a moment here. I'm going to switch over to my virtual machine here. All right, you should be seeing CODESOFT now. So first thing we're going to do is just open up a simple label template. Just grab one of the samples. Now, a label does need to be open for us to create a document level password. And as I said earlier, this is going to be the easiest thing you can do to lock down one of your label templates, because right now everything's open. I could just start moving objects around or modifying some of the variables. Now, to set up a document level password, we need to use the file dropdown. We'll select properties, jump over to the extended tab, and we'll see the set document password button. So here we're seeing full control print only. Full control does need to be entered before we enter a print only. You'll see it's grayed out. If it wasn't like that, you could theoretically essentially lock yourself out of the label template. Full control is just what it sounds like. You have full administrative rights. Print only is going to only allow the print user to enter things into the form. So if I use this label and I click print, we have a form over here. This is what they can enter. So essentially anything in this simple print window. So you want to keep in mind that they can change the printer, they can change the quantity, and anything listed in this form, whether it's information from a database or when printed fields. Outside of that, they're going to be locked out, and they would need the full control password. So it's pretty vanilla. It's pretty easy to set up right out of the box. Now, a big step up from there is going to be our user manager. As I said, that's embedded in the software. However, you're not really launching user manager from CODESOFT. It's done through the start menu. So we're going to click start. We're going to scroll down to T's for tech links. We'll see the user manager shortcut down at the bottom here. Now, before we jump into this window, I just want to show you the users on this virtual machine. I'm currently logged in as this TKX admin. I also have a user called print user. So we can use user manager with local accounts that are local to this PC, or Active Directory accounts. The choice is yours. So we'll take a look at what the software will look like with both of these accounts. So right now, I have two groups in User Manager. I have an administrators group and a guest group, and those are going to be in there by default. There's one person under admin, and that's whoever has installed the software. So if you're logged into a PC with a specific account, you actually install the software, you're automatically placed in the admins group. Now let's say we want to set up a print users group. We could right click on either one of these and choose a new profile. We'll just type in print users, hit enter, and now we have a new group called print users. Now if we want to add a user to this group, again, pretty straightforward. We're just right clicking on the group, choosing new user, and we'll see the default Windows select users box pop up. So you need to choose the location. So right now, this is just coming from my virtual machine. If you have an Active Directory domain controller, you would change the location to pull from your entire directory. You'd type in the name. I usually choose check names to make sure it finds it, which it did. Click OK, and now we've added my print user to the print users group. Now, if we want to modify the permissions of these groups, we just highlight the group, and on the right are all of the permissions. Now, it does get pretty granular, and I just want to warn you right away, I can't tell you how many times I've had like a print user and end user create a print user group, and they've simply unchecked everything except for what's in the printing tab. You do want to take a look at each of these, because what that means is the print user now cannot exit the application. It also means that under the document section here, they can't open up existing ones. They can't close existing ones. Now, some of these make sense. You don't want them to create new ones on their own or inserts. Maybe you don't want them to save. That makes sense. Maybe really all they're doing is opening and printing. We'll keep a lot of those unchecked. But again, there are some key options in here you do want to take note of. The editing section will probably want to uncheck all of these except for use shared variables. Maybe there's a shared counter or shared data source, again, shared between multiple labels. So they will need to use that, so that will need to remain checked. Printing, we'll want all this checked. Maybe you don't want them to change printers, so you can uncheck select printer. The user interface, display options, customize toolbars. That's really up to your discretion. Database. If there is a database connection, maybe we don't want them creating new ones, but they will need to run existing ones to get a result back from that database. We might want to keep run ODBC query checked. Printing log file, again, up to your discretion. Preferences, again, up to your discretion. Network settings, if it is a network license, you might want to keep that one checked. Same with default folders if you want to allow them to pull from different directories, things of that nature. But now that we have all of this set, we would simply go to applications, make sure we save and exit. Now again, I'm logged in as that administrator, so everything's available to me. So I'm going to close down CODESOFT. And rather than sign out of this VM and sign back in, because that might take a moment, I will just run CODESOFT as a different user, specifically that print user. And right away, we can see everything is no longer available. We can open up existing labels. But it's not going to let me move any of these fields around, make any modifications to the objects or the variables on the right. A lot of these, as I said, are going to be unchecked. We can do simple things like zoom in or out or go to the next record. And we can also use the print button and print these labels. So again, big step up from that vanilla just setting up a document password. And it sort of takes away your end users needing to memorize a username and password for each label template. They're just logging into the workstation. Once they're logged in, their permissions are all set. Now, so we can actually proceed with this webinar, I'm going to need to log back in as the other user. And then we'll take a look at enabling those log files. Enabling the log files in CODESOFT, you would use the Tools dropdown and choose Log File. Pretty straightforward. It's going to be disabled by default, so if you do want to use log files, you'll need to jump in here and toggle this to on. First option is use document name as log file name. So if our label is called document1, the log file name is going to be document1 dot either txt or csv. The extension is up to you. If you want to give it a completely unique name, you can uncheck that and type in the name you want there. Editor by default is just going to be Notepad. It's installed in every Windows operating system. If you do want to change it to a different text editor, you can certainly do that. Notepad++ is pretty popular. Daily based file name is just going to add a date stamp to the name. It will add a 4-digit year, 2-digit month, and then 2-digit day to the end. And here we're choosing where that log file gets saved to. I'm just going to place it on the desktop. Now, under the Options tab, here's where we're choosing what actually gets logged. And before I proceed with that section, I'm going to open up just a sample label. Because if you look under data sources here, we have 3 options: selected, all, or none. It's going to be set to none by default, which means the only thing that will log right now is what's checked off in this scrolling window. So right now I have a lot of the important ones like label file name, printer name, total number of labels, include headers, that's going to be a popular one, and username, so who's actually doing the printing. We have some other options in here, number of labels in the series, copies of the communication port or the port that the printer is connected to, and the height and the width. These are going to be the same for each label template, but the individual variables on the label, like the formulas, when printed fields, the database fields, dates, stamps, counters, things like that, choosing how to log those down here under data sources. So as I said, it's set to none right now. We can choose all of them. Let's say you have 50 variables, but really 2 of them are important. You can move that to selected. And if it's at selected, there's one extra step. You do need to jump into the variable itself. So let's say it's this when printed field. We'd go to the Output tab and check off include in the log file. So that's how we're using the selected option. Otherwise, it is just that blanket all. It will record all of the variable information. Track each label. Let's say we're doing huge batch jobs with the database connection. It will log each label template in there, and then again, we can include the date and define the format of that date. Lastly, we have the file format, whether it's tab, non-delineated, or comma separated. So we'll just choose all of them, click OK. We'll try a test print here. Click print, and we'll see that log file pop up. And we can see all our column headers. I just chose comma separated and the actual variables themselves. So pretty useful if, as I said earlier in the webinar, you have variables that just cannot be repeated, like a counter is probably the most prominent one or repeated one that I've come across. And if it does repeat or go back to an earlier number, you can jump into that log file and determine how that happened. Last thing we're going to take a look at is Form Editor and Form Designer. Now, Form Editor is, for that to really be locked down with a print user, it needs to be used through ClickPrint. Form Editor is really just a way to design the print interface or the form. So the form by default is just going to look like this. I'll pull up both at the same time. So a series of when printed fields, maybe there's a database connection that's tied into one of these, but it's pretty bland. So I'm just going to do a quick walkthrough of how to enable Form Editor. Again, we're not going to really dive into designing forms here because, as I said, there is a separate topical webinar specifically for that. To get started, however, we would right-click in the form, choose form settings. By default, it's going to be set to automatic. We would just switch that to custom, click OK. It's going to blank it out because what we still need to do is right-click on this and then choose Edit Form. And now we can start designing our form. The sky's the limit with this. We can add all of these objects on the left. And there's going to be variable properties on how we want those displayed on the right. Now, if we do that, I'm actually going to pull up one of the samples right now. The custom forms, let's grab the identity. So if we do that, you can still launch the edited form through CODESOFT. So you still have the option to modify some of these. Now, because this is about security and traceability, what we want to do is remove this. So if you want to design a specific form and no longer allow the print user to actually launch the print interface through the software, what we can do is we can actually close this down, close CODESOFT down, and just use Click Print. A little shortcut in that text links window. So we're hitting the Start button, going down to Text Links, and clicking Click Print. Now, I've seen a number of ways on how to lock this down. Not even using user manager or document level passwords. You can, I've seen administrators just remove all the shortcuts and just place Click Print on the desktop. Or again, you can use user manager so they can't really do anything in the software. You can enable the document level passwords. Again, there's a number of ways to go about this within CODESOFT, and it's whatever you're more comfortable with. However, launching Click Print doesn't allow you to view the design software. We're just seeing a snapshot of the label templates based on what directory we're pulling from. So these are all of the labels in this directory. It's limited to 10 labels by default. We can increase that number if you have more labels in that directory. Your end user would just click on the print button. It's going to launch the print form, not the design view. So there's no changes made. And then they would start printing. So right out of the box, we can remove the design aspect, sort of locking it down. And a step up from Form Editor and Click Print is going to be Form Design. This is the one that I liken to Visual Basic without the actual scripting. So we're launching a form that we've completely customized. This is one of the pre-included forms that's embedded with CODESOFT. It's a sample included with CODESOFT. From here, you can choose a label. Depending on the label that you've chosen, you can change some of the variable information, the when printed fields, or maybe there's a table lookup, so you can type in a key field. You'll see a preview on the right, printer selection, how many you want to print, and then the print button. And if you want to change the print driver settings, you can do that as well. So this is just the form that I double-clicked on. Launches the form. That's really all the end user would need on their desktop. Now, to create that form, you would be using Form Editor, and that's again in the Tech Links dropdown. So we're just choosing Form Designer. I'm getting Form Editor and Form Designer mixed up. So we're launching Form Designer, and again, I'm just going to launch that simple generic sample that I had up. So I'll go to File, Open, choose the generic form. And again, it's very much like Visual Basic. We're just not doing the actual scripting. So we can choose whether we want labels, buttons, text boxes, check boxes, radio buttons, group box, list box, combo box, data grid, database grid, pictures, and preview. So quite a few things we can drop on here. You'll see that when I highlight any of these objects, we'll see the properties right here, the form properties. So I've highlighted the entirety of the form. We'll see we have a few variables and control variables. You'll see the background image. So maybe you want to change that gray barcode in the background for your own environment. You can change what image that's pulling from. If you want your own company logo, you can highlight that, change the file that's being used. Maybe you want to change the URL. If you are using the generic form for your environment, this is probably the easiest place to start because it's really already built for you. Again, maybe you just want to remove some of these objects so it better fits your environment. Probably the biggest change you would need to do is change where the labels are pulled from. So you'd simply highlight this list box. You can see the folder that it's pulling from. You just point it to a different directory, and then this would be populated by the labels in your directory. It's already filtering any CODESOFT labels, so .lab files are only going to be displayed here, so you can have extra text files in there or images, things of that nature. But again, in the design view, in the form view, the only thing displayed would be the label files. Really, I wouldn't change the data grid. It's already set up to pull from the variables listed in this list box. Print preview is already set up for you. The only thing you can really change with the printers dropdown is whether or not you're pulling strictly the internal drivers, the embedded drivers in CODESOFT. Those are going to be the THT drivers. You can also only pull the Windows drivers or a combination of both. That would be the THT_Windows. And the rest I would leave as is. So that's going to be the quantity and then the print button. But again, this is, as I said, a step up from using ClickPrint. It's really locking down what the print user can adjust. So there's no design view. They're not able to modify the objects or the variables or the database connections. They're just opening up a form, whether it's ClickPrint or form design, highlighting some label templates that they want to print, putting in some quantities and clicking print. That's really all they can do. If you give me a moment here, we're going to slide back into the presentation. We're going to go over a brief recap again. You can secure your labels with password protection. That's the sort of vanilla out-of-the-box way to do it. You're just enabling that document-level password. It was the administrative and the print-only password. Easiest thing you can do. Step up from there is using User Manager. That's where we're creating the groups, assigning permissions to the groups, and then assigning the users to those groups. Again, that's also included in CODESOFT, so no add-on. And again, your end users, even your administrators, they don't need to memorize specific usernames or passwords for CODESOFT or for the label templates. They're just using their Windows login, their Active Directory login. You can protect those labels using Form Editor and ClickPrint, and you can enforce data validation through Form Designer. Again, that's where for both of those, we're removing the design interface. And lastly, we can enable that log file for auditing purposes. Maybe you need to double check a misprint. You can see how that got printed, who did the printing, what printer it came out of, what variable information was entered, things of that nature. We've got one more poll before we jump into the Q&A section here. We're going to go ahead and launch that now. Just seeing which features that we went over you would find most beneficial. We'll leave these open for a minute or so while we're getting some of this information. It seems to be pretty straight across the board for the most part so far. However, the simple password protection is lagging behind. Well, it looks like User Manager is pulling ahead at this point. I do like how you can lock down what end users or print users are capable of. And again, they don't have to memorize a specific login. They should already have their Windows login memorized. And that's all they would need. We'll go ahead and close that down and share the results. It looks like it was, for the most part, it was User Manager. And that makes sense. That's pretty easy to set up. You're just adding users that already exist into those groups. And then with the tie with a form editor and log file, simple password protection. Jumped ahead of form designer. Form designer is it's a little bit intimidating at first, but if you do view the topical webinar on that one, we show you how to just use the generic form, and you don't have to start from scratch. You can use the sample that's already included in CODESOFT and just modify that to fit your environment. That one's pretty straightforward. It's a little bit of a customized approach for your business or for your end users. So we've officially hit that Q&A section here. Just going to pause for a moment to review some of these. Maybe there's something we can talk about live. I just want to talk to the moderator, see if there's anything that didn't get answered. Quite a few questions. It looks like a few that have been answered. Can templates have locked sections so certain parts can't be edited? Using user manager, that's going to be a blanket. Yes, they can modify. No, they can't. Same with the design aspect. However, you can lock specific objects on the label. You simply right-click on the object and choose locked. If I pull up CODESOFT here, we can try to show that to you. While I'm switching over to that VM, we'll take a look at some of the other questions here. How can you prevent recalls due to labeling errors? Again, that's locking down the environment. It's going to be limiting what end users can type in. So let's say there's when printed fields or table lookups, which means they're actually typing in information. It's going to be using output masks. So let's say they're typing in a five character variable, whatever it is, it's 5 characters. You can set the min and max lengths on those variables to 5 so that they can't accidentally type in 4 or 6. If it's all alpha, we can lock it down so that it's only alpha characters. Again, you can't accidentally type in numbers and vice versa. We can go through validation in some of the formulas within CODESOFT so that whatever you're typing in is validated off of some sort of second criteria. There's a lot of options. But some of the easier, the bigger ones are what we went through today, where you're removing the design aspect. Because once you have it set up, once you have all of this set up, there shouldn't be any issues unless something's changed. The software is just not going to change on its own. Concerning that first question, I'm just going to open up a sample label. Show you how to lock down some of those fields. You just simply right-click on the object, and you'll see the lock unlock. An interesting question. Can we set up a password so that a user can do changes but not be able to save the changes? Within User Manager, there's an option to allow save and save as. So maybe you want the end user to not modify some sort of template some master label, but they can open it up and do a save as. That would create a second label, and that one they can modify. So a bit of a workaround, but those options are available. Just going over some of the questions. Again, don't forget, if you are interested in that form editor, form designer, feel free to ask our moderator, Tony, for those links. Or if you'd rather do that at a later time, you can use our contact information, reach out for the other relevant training webinars. We do have some other topical training webinars you can download as well, geared towards data grids and for document printing and some advanced formulas and database connections. And as I said, this is a two-part mini series. So next week's is going to touch on label archive and CODESOFT. So you're still designing the labels within CODESOFT. However, there's an add-on called label archive. So this is going to allow you to do the three-step approval process, where maybe you have a label designer. They'll design the label, they'll submit it for an approval. You'll have a user who's an approver. They'll check it, review it, accept or reject it. If it's accepted, it can become available for print. If it's rejected, it would kind of get pushed back to the designer with some notes. It has heavy audit trails. And again, maybe you need to meet CFR 21 compliance or GDPR standards. It's all encrypted in a specific database. It can be either SQL or Access. And Scott Fabian will be presenting that. We're going to go ahead and wrap up the webinar here. I'll disconnect. We'll keep the questions section open just to make sure that we've answered all of the questions that are coming in here. Just want to thank you all for joining me on this topical webinar. Hope to see you next week, and I hope you all have a good rest of your afternoon.